Alright guys, it's finally time we tackle the king of lobsters himself. Let's get right into it. I'm going to be providing a link in the description to the New York Times article talking about Jordan Peterson and his 12 Rules for Life book. The person who wrote the article got to spend about 2 days with Jordan Peterson in his house observing all of his daily routines. He also got to interview him throughout the process, and this article is essentially the culmination of all that work. Now, none of this would really bother me terribly much. Honestly, I don't care too much for Jordan Peterson, but there is a part of this that sticks out, and I know it has stuck out for a lot of other people. And that's when Jordan Peterson advocates for enforced monogamy. Now, I know other people have done this to death, but I don't know if they've necessarily tackled the fact that he actually did a follow-up on this. So we're going to see what he means when he talks about enforced monogamy and what all that entails.
Okay. So the question is, what do you mean by enforced monogamy?
Well, we could start by what I don't mean. I don't mean taking innocent women at gunpoint and handing them over to useless men.
Let's go ahead and stop right there. So the first thing I'd like to point out is that he takes this to a logical extreme in order to articulate his point. In the article, he is asked about a particular individual who labels himself as an incel who killed 10 people in a minivan. He's asked what he thinks about these violent attacks and what possibly causes them. And here's where the enforced monogamy part comes up, and why this distinction might need to be made between his logical extreme and what he actually said. From the article, violent attacks are what happens when men do not have partners. Mr. Peterson says that any society needs to work to make sure those men are married. The incel in particular was angry at God because women were rejecting him. The cure for these violent attacks is enforced monogamy. That's actually why monogamy emerges. So in Jordan Peterson's mind, the only reason that people commit violent attacks like this are because they're angry at women rejecting them. Now, the interview would lead us to believe that he is advocating not for these people to be forced into monogamy. But as per the article, he is definitely advocating for people to be forced into monogamous relationships in order to curb their violent tendencies. So if we have a man who is prone to violence and we have a woman who is being forced into this relationship in order to appease some status quo that will supposedly prevent this person from being violent, we are now putting this woman in an abusive situation. But Peterson says that this is not what he's advocating for. He is not advocating for a forced monogamy, just enforced monogamy. So what's the difference? Well, let's see.
Which is essentially the accusation. You know, and it was really interesting to watch that unfold. What I meant was that monogamy as something that's socially valued appears to be essentially a human universal. That doesn't mean that human beings are universally monogamous, because obviously we're not. We can be serially monogamous, and some people are players and have multiple partners and all of that. But
we'll have to stop him right here again, because actually there are more options than just monogamous and a player. For instance, I would like to direct anybody who is curious to the polyamorous crowd of people who are actually not monogamous and also are not players. They don't cheat on their partners. Cheating involves an act of deception, and polyamorous people actually do not deceive their partners. They have conversations about this beforehand, and in most cases, partners are agreed upon by all parties before anyone is allowed to enter the relationship on the whole. There is no part of that is actually considered being a player, and it is most certainly not part of this false dichotomy that he's trying to feed us. So in the first part, he seems to be backpedaling from what we can extrapolate from the article itself in redefining his version of enforced monogamy, and in the second part of this, he's being disingenuous to a large portion of the population which are in fact not monogamous.
There's a strong proclivity across known societies to tilt towards monogamy. And the enforcement is social norms. It's like, well, think about it. I can't believe that I even have to say this.
Well, Mr. Peterson, the reason you have to say this is because the verbiage you used in the article itself was definitely not the same thing as enforcement via social norms. How exactly would you propose that society ensure that males who are prone to violence are married? Social norms do not do that. Social norms do not ensure that anybody is going to be married. Moreover, I don't see any data that shows that being married actually curbs violence in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I would think the exact opposite, given the astronomical astronomical amount of domestic abuse cases. Later in the article, it says that he's staunchly against what he calls equality of outcomes, but he is for interventions that would redistribute sex. I guess he's thinking that these people just need to get laid and that will somehow magically prevent them from being violent. So, Mr. Peterson, I think what you need to understand is that the reason that you are having to say this is because the way you portrayed yourself in the article is a little bit different than how you're trying to portray yourself now. To the point where I would say you're not clarifying anything, you're backpedaling.
Your son just gets married and he comes home and he says, "Guess what, Dad? I've been screwing around." And what do? You pat him on the head and you say, "Hey, good work, kid. That's my young man."
No, you probably wouldn't be saying this, but again, you're being incredibly disingenuous to the crowd of people who are polyamorous and not players. There's a difference between a consensual relationship amongst multiple people and screwing around.
Right? Well, no, you're not happy about that. And he doesn't tell you because he knows you're not going to be happy about it. And that's enforced monogamy. It's part of the social structure. It's like, what else is enforced monogamy? It's like, well, most people want a monogamous relationship.
Unfortunately, at this point, you're describing more societal norms, but you're not actually describing enforcement. That's the difference. You're trying to use your own special Jordan Peterson version of the word enforcement instead of the actual accepted version of the word enforcement. When you enforce a law, it's not because there are societal norms that say that you're going to follow this law. It's because there's actually punishment and repercussions for not following the law. That is enforcement. So in this idea of enforced monogamy, what would you actually have as the series of benefits and punishments for the individuals? When you enforce a rule in a game, the reward is being able to play the game still, and the punishment for not following that rule is probably not being able to play that game anymore. But somehow this word has completely different meaning to Jordan Peterson once it's applied to monogamy. But let's see what else he considers enforced monogamy.
And if they enter into a relationship with someone, they're not happy if that person goes and sleeps around, right? Most of you wouldn't be happy if that happened. It's like not being happy, that's part of enforced monogamy.
Not being happy with something is not part of enforcement. Again, that would be a part of societal norms. Again, I don't see how enforcement comes into this situation in any way, shape, or form. But he's still got more to say.
It's part of this, and you might have noticed, you probably did, polygamy is actually illegal. You can't have multiple marital partners simultaneously. That's enforced monogamy.
Well, there's a difference here. See, marriages and relationships are the same thing. The only difference is how much government involvement and benefits you get from one versus the other. In a standard relationship, one of the benefits is that if the relationship doesn't work out, you don't necessarily have to worry about paying things like alimony. You can hash out what's yours and what's theirs pretty civilly without having to get a court involved. Whereas if you're married and split up, there's a whole plethora of issues that crop up. But if you're married and stay together, then you do get tax breaks and you do get other benefits. This is actually one of the reasons why polyamory is such a contentious topic when trying to figure out marital rights. It's incredibly difficult to figure out tax breaks, insurance policies, and things of that nature when there are multiple people involved. I'm not saying that as a method of preventing polyamorous people from having marriage rights like any other monogamous person has nowadays, but I am pointing out that there's a distinction between marriage and relationship. Not all relationships are marriages, and there are pros and cons to both. So actually, especially in the United States, you can have multiple partners in a relationship, and monogamy is not enforced.
It's like, and it's an anthropological term, and it's been known for 100 years by anthropologists, most of whom are left-leaning, by the way, because that's how it goes, that monogamous social structures are one of the ways that you keep children raised properly so that they have a relatively stable environment, and that you keep male aggression, especially the aggression of young men, under some degree of social control.
So if the parents aren't married, the children will be aggressive? Now, granted, I do understand the point that children raised in a stable household generally are more stable going forward. But here's the problem. You can't enforce the parents to stay together, especially if things don't work out within the parents. That's not fair or healthy for the parents. Sometimes, especially in my case, it's better for the parents to no longer live together and raise the child separately than be stuck in a toxic relationship, because that toxicity will bleed down into the child. It has nothing to do with the child being raised by two parents. It has everything to do with the child being raised in a household that is not toxic. So under this version of enforced monogamy, would these parents be forced to stay together for the child's sake? And as per before, weren't we talking about the child being aggressive? Isn't this child going to not be aggressive the minute that they get a partner? At this point, I don't think that Jordan Peterson actually has a very good grip on psychology. Anger issues and aggressiveness and violent tendencies can be caused by a plethora of reasons, a toxic household being one of them, but certainly not the end-all be-all factor.
It's not a mystery. The fact that I got in trouble for that it's kind of a miracle. It's like, well, don't you notice that we enforce monogamy in like almost every way? And that the same thing happens all over the world in all sorts of diverse societies?
Nope. I don't notice an enforcement of monogamy. I do notice a social norm of monogamy, but they are not the same thing, no matter how much you would like to equivocate the two. Moreover, there are other societies that actually have very strictly polygamous hierarchical structures, which are not the same thing as polyamorous and are also not the same thing as monogamous. What's the social norm there? Moreover, as I said before, the reason that you quote-unquote got in trouble for that is not because you said that monogamy is a social norm, it's because you used the word enforced. And as I said earlier in the video, enforcement has a lot of baggage on it. If you don't want to get in trouble for what you're saying, then please use another word that does not have the same level of baggage. Moreover, don't take that word and try to shape and mold it into your own personal meaning of the word and then say, why did I get in trouble for using my personal version of this word?
And then when we deviate from that there's a price to be paid. So that's why, like, I'm a New York Times pariah, is because I think that monogamy, all things considered, is a good idea. So, okay, fine.
I don't know how many times I'm going to say it, but you did not get completely lambasted because you said monogamy is a good idea. You got lambasted because you said enforced monogamy. But I think I've hammered in the point that enforcement and societal norms are very different, no matter how much Mr. Peterson would like to equivocate the two. If you'd like context for the conversation, then please take a look at the New York Times article that I linked. I'll also have a link to this snippet of his interview as well, available for anybody who wants to watch that. With that said, everybody, I hope you guys liked my first tackling of Jordan Peterson. All the usual links to Discord, Patreon, Facebook, Twitter, and all the like will be in the description below. Please like and share the video if you enjoyed it. And before we get into the Patreon slides, everyone, as always, insert end of video tagline here.